You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Our sponsor, Collide, has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet up to 100% compliance. How? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they fix the problem. It's that simple. Without Collide, IT struggles to solve basic problems, like ensuring everyone's OS and browser are up to date. Unsecure devices log into your company's apps with no problems because there's nothing there to stop them. But Collide works seamlessly with Okta to enforce compliance as part of authentication and complete the Zero Trust security puzzle. Visit collide.com/CyberWire Daily to learn more or book a demo. That's KOLIDE.com/CyberWire Daily. Section 230 survives SCOTUS, Lemon Group's pre-infected devices. The IRS is sending cyber attachés to 4 countries in a new pilot program. A Wisconsin man is charged with stealing DraftKings credentials. Russian hacktivists conduct DDoS attacks against Polish news outlets. An update on RedStinger. Grayson Milbourne from OpenText Cybersecurity discusses IoT and the price we pay for convenience. Our guest is Matthew Keeley with information on an open-source domain spoofing tool, Spoofy, and war principles and hacktivist auxiliaries. I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Friday, May 19th, 2023. The Supreme Court made decisions on 2 cases concerning the liability of social media platforms that contain terroristic content. Both cases, Twitter versus Tomne and Gonzalez versus Google, were initiated by the families of ISIS victims in Paris and Istanbul. The case against Twitter raised the question of whether the platform can be accused of aiding in terrorism for hosting tweets from ISIS. The case against Google asks if their recommendation system is protected under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which Article 19 explains grants legal immunity to online platforms for content posted by third parties and allows platforms to remove objectionable content without exposing themselves to liability. The Supreme Court unanimously ruled in favor of Twitter and dismissed the case against Google. A cyber criminal gang called Lemon Group has been leveraging pre-infected Android devices for malicious activity, Trend Micro reports. No fewer than 8.9 million devices, primarily budget phones, have been affected. According to the Hacker News, the gang has also been seen branching out to Android-based IoT devices. Bleeping Computer reports that the pre-installed malware, Gorilla, allows the hackers to load additional payloads, intercept texts, and hijack WhatsApp. The infected devices were reportedly reflashed with new ROMs, although it was not determined how the devices were initially infected. As the researchers explain, reflashing is reprogramming and/or replacing the existing firmware of a device with a new one. The highest rates of infestation have been found in the U.S., Mexico, Indonesia, Thailand, Russia, South Africa, India, Angola, the Philippines, and Argentina. The IRS announced yesterday that it would begin a cyber attaché pilot program extending to 4 countries. The Hill reported that attachés will be sent to Australia, Colombia, Germany, and Singapore. This is not the first instance of IRS criminal investigation agents being sent abroad, and the IRS has a permanent cyber attaché at The Hague in the Netherlands. In a statement announcing the program, IRS CI Chief Jim Lee said, "In order to effectively combat cybercrime, we need to ensure that our foreign counterparts have access to the same tools and expertise we have in the United States." Joseph Garrison, an 18-year-old from Wisconsin, was charged yesterday for hacking into approximately 60,000 DraftKings sports betting accounts in November of 2022. The complaint filed by the FBI explained that Mr. Garrison was able to purchase credentials from a third-party site and sell around 1,600 of the hacked accounts, causing about $600,000 to be withdrawn from the victims. Bleeping Computer explains that Mr. Garrison is also accused of running a dark web trafficking site that sells hacked accounts. The complaint alleges that law enforcement had located an undated picture showing that Goat Shop had sold over 225,000 products for a total sales revenue of over $2 million. Polish news agencies were taken offline yesterday by distributed denial of service attacks, Cybernews reports. The Polish government attributes the actions to Russian hacktivists. Such groups are well known to function as auxiliary cyber forces. DDoS campaigns have become a characteristic feature of Russia's hybrid war. HelpNet Security, citing a study by Aurelion, reviews the ways in which DDoS attacks attend geopolitical conflict. TASS is authorized to disclose that Yevgeny Kotikov has been convicted of crimes intended to disrupt the Russian Federation's IT infrastructure. Kotikov was reportedly involved in a computer DDoS attack organized by the Ukrainian side on the information systems of subjects of the critical information infrastructure of the Russian Federation. He will serve 3 years in a penal colony. Cybernews has a description of the conditions that accompany such a sentence. Suffice it to say, they are not good. Malwarebytes has recently reported on a cyber espionage group of uncertain provenance, RedStinger, which appears to have selected targets on both sides of Russia's war against Ukraine. Kaspersky researchers this morning released a report on a group they call Cloud Wizard, and which they explicitly identify not only with RedStinger, but also with the groups responsible for earlier operations in the region going back as far as 2008. Kaspersky, as a matter of policy, doesn't attribute cyber operations to nation-states. Who's behind RedStinger remains an open question. Whoever it turns out to be, Wired points out, the ability to quietly mount offensive cyber campaigns over a 15-year period is remarkable. And finally, in war, even a just cause doesn't always equate to just conduct. Ukrainian-aligned hacktivists have conducted deception operations designed to unmask the identities of Russian officers and cause other mischief in the lives of enemy leaders. Some of those actions have involved deceiving the officers' family members, specifically their wives, into unwitting participation. Just Security has a thoughtful overview of the ways in which this and other activity in cyberspace have served to erode respect for the customary principles on which the norms of armed conflict are founded. Specifically, the principle of discrimination between combatant and non-combatant seems to be flouted by much hacktivist activity. While it might seem that deceiving a family is trivial in comparison with ordering the bombing of a hospital, which one of the Russian officers caught up in the deception is alleged to have done, any coarsening of moral sensibilities is dangerous. Governments need to exercise control over their auxiliaries as much as they do over their regulars. Coming up after the break, Grayson Milbourne from OpenText Cybersecurity discusses IoT and the price we pay for convenience. Our guest is Matthew Keeley with information on an open-source domain spoofing tool, Spoofy. Stay with us. And now, a word from our sponsor, Mimecast. You're wondering if you need more email and collaboration security, because, as it turns out, just protecting your workspace with M365 isn't good enough. You just watched your entire company grind to a screeching halt, all because someone opened a phishing email. Next time, don't rely on one-size-fits-all security. Protect your inbox with Mimecast and diversify your security stack. For a free trial, go to mimecast.com and keep your business from, falling apart. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the cybercrime analytics leader. SpyCloud disrupts cybercrime by telling you what criminals know about your business and your customers, so you can take action to prevent ransomware, account takeover, and online fraud. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, including credentials, cookies, and PII siphoned from malware-infected devices. With knowledge of the specific data criminals have in hand from InfoStealer malware on managed and unmanaged devices, security teams can respond with a more efficient and effective process called post-infection remediation. Get SpyCloud's post-infection remediation guide outlining the 7 steps for preventing a malware infection from becoming a full-blown ransomware incident. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. Matthew Keeley is Senior Application Security Engineer at SeatGeek and was previously Senior Security Consultant at Bishop Fox, where he developed an open-source tool called Spoofy, which checks domains against SPF and DMARC records.
With the most common cybercrime being phishing, it only makes sense to have a tool that can sort of tell if domains can be spoofed. And so what I mean by that is when somebody sends an email to you, a lot of times what can happen is when you receive the email, what an attacker can do is they can actually change the name of where the email came from, or the location of where it came from, or anything like that. And in doing so, you can spoof the email so that it lands perfectly in the victim's inbox and looks legitimate. So what attackers are doing is they're sending these spoofed emails into victims' inboxes. And a lot of times it's for phishing. Sometimes it's for sending wires to different locations. Sometimes it's to get credentials. Sometimes it's to download malware. But ultimately, the reason the Spoofy tool was built was to be able to determine and identify why domains were accepting these malicious emails and how to prevent them.
Well, if we can dig into a little more of the background here, where do we stand with existing tools that are trying to help with this sort of thing, things like DMARC?
Right. So there are some existing tools, but not a lot of them are completely accurate in terms of domain spoofing. So domain spoofing is quite complex, and it goes rather deep into the SPF and DMARC records. So what those are is basically with the role of SPF, which is the Sender Policy Framework. What it does is it acts as a text record on the DNS settings for a given domain. And so what it'll do is it'll act like a guest list for a party, for example. And so it'll specify what email servers are allowed to send emails on behalf of that domain. So a good example that I give in one of the blog posts that I've written about it is that if you have a domain and you want your HR system, Greenhouse, to be able to send emails on your behalf, what you can do is you can actually set that up in the SPF record. And so those emails will be able to send as your domain. CyberWire.com, for example, and send through like that. And so what we sort of run into is that attackers can abuse the way that these SPF and DMARC records are set up to be able to land these domains in the inboxes. And there are tools to be able to monitor and track the records. However, they're quite ambiguous and not always one-to-one with the RFC for SPF or DMARC. And so what we find is that there's a ton of domains out there that are still misconfigured. And a lot of people just don't know it.
So Spoofy is an open source tool here. Walk us through it. What exactly does it do?
Yeah, so Spoofy is a Python 3 tool. It's an open source tool. And basically what it will do is it will take in a list of domains and it will validate the SPF and DMARC records of those domains. So there's a huge chart that a very great researcher named Alex Royce created. And it's all the logic of every single edge case that could possibly happen when you have a SPF and a DMARC record. And so what he did is he took a list of about 50,000 domains, And he went through them all one by one to figure out every single edge case that could happen when you send an email to some sort of inbox. And so what we ended up finding and what we created Spoofy to do is to catch all those edge cases. So you could have a perfect SPF record that works just as you would expect it to, but some weird, syntax error or something weird that you set up in the DMARC record, and everything can go wrong, and then the domain can still be spoofed. So what Spoofy does is it's a tool that handles the scalability of that. So it will take in a huge list of domains. It's multi-threaded, so it can go anywhere from 100 domains to a couple 100,000 domains, and it will validate those SPF and DMARC records and tell you if the domain is spoofable or not.
And so who is this for? What's the ideal use case here?
Yeah, so a lot of the feedback we've been getting is mostly people that are in IT on the blue teaming side. Originally, I wrote it as a red team tool, and it's actually a tool that's listed in the course by Rastamouse, the red team ops course. But it can be used by both. So red teamers are using it to find domains that they can send spoofed emails on behalf of, and then go and fix that for their organization. And blue teamers are taking their list of domains. So they may take it out of GoDaddy or Route 53. They're pumping in their list of domains and validating that their SPF and DMARC records are correct. So sort of one of those tools that we intentionally wrote for red teamers, and then it started actually being more popular in the blue team space.
Why was it important for you and your colleagues to make this an open source project?
So the thing with open source tools is it's supposed to help everybody, right? And so if we wanted it just to be a red team tool, more on the malicious side, it wouldn't really make sense in that aspect. There are tools out there that do some of the stuff that Spoofy does. However, we took a lot of what the other tools were doing and then combined it all into one tool that basically will check like your SPF includes. It'll check everything. So being open source, we get a lot more community feedback. It's useful for anybody that wants to use this sort of things. And, we're not sort of gatekeeping this technology. It should be able to be used by anybody to protect their domains.
And people can get it on GitHub, yes?
Yep, absolutely. So it's on GitHub. I think it's github.com/MattKeeley/Spoofy. And we just released version 1.01, which allows for multi-threading. So now we can go through about 1,000 domains in roughly 15 seconds. So a lot more scalability in that aspect.
That's Matthew Keeley from SeatGeek. You can learn more about Spoofy on the Bishop Fox website. Be sure to check out the extended version of this interview. It's part of CyberWire Pro. And joining me once again is Grayson Milbourne. He is Security Intelligence Director at OpenText Security Solutions. Grayson, it's always a pleasure to welcome you back to the show. I think like a lot of folks, over the holiday, my home was populated with some additional IoT devices. It seems inevitable these days, but you make the point that IoT in general is something that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's one of these great new conveniences that technology has added to our lives. And while it's great that we can connect things and have little robots that keep our house nice and tidy, a lot of people really don't think about the security element of this. And some unfortunate data has come to light recently that shows that the vendors of these convenience applications and robots and smart appliances, they're collecting a lot more information than I think people realize. And as one example, there was a story a couple of weeks ago about data coming onto the internet from Roomba vacuums and people in the bathroom. And
right.
Wait a second, I thought I was just getting a clean floor, and now my pictures are on the internet. Wait a second. And so that's just one example. But the reality is when we really look at IoT devices across the board, security is very frequently not even part of the thought process, right? They want to make something, bring it to market, and learn about as much as they can about you in that process, and protecting your information. As we've seen, if you look at the Roomba box, it doesn't say that it has a camera, right? It doesn't. They're not advertising these additional functionalities, and I think that's a really serious security and privacy breach.
What about for folks who are in charge of protecting organizations? What sort of IoT vigilance should they have?
Yeah, well, so I think that's really where businesses need to pay attention, because you can have a smart water heater or a toaster, or a lot of other kitchen appliances are often becoming smarter and smarter today, and a lot of offices have overlap there. And I think the challenge is that these devices can have vulnerabilities that can leak the network authentication data. And so I think it's mostly important to segment them on your networks properly. And you can actually do this at home. And so the advice I give also to my friends and family is that IoT is really convenient. And also having a separate network for your IoT isn't that difficult to set up. I personally got a mesh network system for my house so that I have a mesh network that gives me better Wi-Fi signal throughout the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I just put my IoT on the mesh network, and it sits behind my router that has my regular internet, and then that broadcasts my Wi-Fi to my phone and to my PCs. But basically everything else that's not a personal device like that sits on the mesh network. Businesses can easily do something similar, in which these devices only have limited access.
What about inventorying the devices themselves? I often hear people say that it's hard enough just keeping track of everything that's been hosed up to their network or their Wi-Fi.
Right. And so, technology has done somewhat of an improvement here. So I can speak at least for Comcast. I have them in my house, and they have an app that lets me tag devices by their MAC address when they join the network. You can set it up so you get an alert. And so I've gone through and I've named the things that are on my network, so that instead of it being, because a lot of them aren't as transparent as you would hope they would be. And so that's one way, right? And then just becoming more familiar with your router and modem, and not looking at it like a black box that spits internet out, but instead, and they've really, I think, made it user friendly, at least in the ones I've experienced, to be able to just block internet access to certain devices based on the MAC. So you kind of have some firewall functionality within these routers today that's easily controlled through the mobile app. And so I think that was one thing that helps. But another question I often get is, how do I vet and choose and know which is the safest IoT device to get?
Right.
And I think that's actually still a big challenge that I would like to see industry solve through something sort of similar to Energy Star. But there could be, Security Star IoT that
right.
Is a set of standards that ensures that just data transmission is done using proper secure channels. And that data storage is done properly, abiding to GDPR or something of a similar regulatory framework that ensures your data is protected. Unfortunately, that doesn't yet exist. And so I think one of the things that I always look for is understanding, where is my data stored? And most of the time, they're pretty transparent about, is it local to the device? Is it something that's up in the cloud? And for me personally, when I shop for IoT devices, I really look for things that don't send a lot of information to the cloud, or that keep everything on my local network, because it worries me, right? For example, I have a doorbell, a smart doorbell, which I think is a really nice security feature, but I don't trust everybody who comes to my house. That's not public knowledge, right? So I don't I shopped around to find a doorbell that doesn't send the data to the cloud, that keeps it all local, but I can still access it. So I think it depends on your own personal privacy boundaries, but there are definitely competitive advantages to considering security as part of the device. And in fact, some of the ones that the example I mentioned, that brand advertises based on that kind of security mindset. So you can look for that, in the meantime.
Yeah, and just be mindful to not be shopping strictly on price too.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. There's a saying that when something is free, you're the product.
Right.
And so we look at social media like that, and Facebook and these platforms that harvest your data for their data mining. IoT is an extension of that in many ways. And if you think about just like the smart vacuum or like a Roomba, Amazon bought Roomba. Roomba has a good idea of what's in your house and where it is, and if it's been moved, and like what are they doing with all this information? And obviously, they're going to argue that they're trying to be convenient and offer smarter, more intelligent suggestions based on improved understanding of you. But is that all they do with the data? Like, how is it protected? To me, like, those types of things make me nervous, and so I try to limit my exposure in that regard.
Yeah. All right. Well, good advice as always. Grayson Milbourne, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. Find out more about sponsoring our programs at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Be sure to check out this weekend's Research Saturday and my conversation with Willie Vasquez from the University of Texas at Austin. We're discussing his research, the most dangerous codec in the world, finding and exploiting vulnerabilities in H.264 decoders. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by Rachel Gelfand. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. Tired of cybersecurity mega conferences? MWise is different. With a focused agenda and targeted problem solving, MWise is where security's best go to get better. From September 18th through the 20th in Washington, D.C., you'll join a special community of security's sharpest minds, hear perspectives you might not get anywhere else, and reach a new level of mastery that'll prepare you for what's next. Register early and save at mwise.mandiant.com/conf23. That's mwise.mandiant.com/conf23.